Where are the tomatoes at? All right. Hey, everybody. Sorry we're running a little bit late. I tried my best to present from Windows XP, and the projector does not like it. What is this HDMI thing anyway? Anyway, I'll retire my machine at some point, but anyway, welcome to my talk. I'm going to show you guys how to get with it. Okay, I picked this topic because this thing has been around for a long time. You guys even use it every day, right? But nobody talks about it, and I'm not sure why that's the case, because I think it's very interesting. Who's written their own context managers? Wow, that's only 30%. Okay, who uses an alternative to writing a context manager? It's in the talk. All right. Oh my God. Okay, that's great. That's great. In our current context, it's me running the show. Okay. All right. So a little bit of background about me. I'm your speaker, Wesley Chun. I'm a teacher, so some of you guys may have been in some of the courses that I teach for fun, outside of work. That's what I do because I love teaching. I also write, so if you guys may have seen Core Python, that's like my main book. If you're wondering where's the next edition, talk to me afterwards. But the most important thing about me is that I'm a software engineer. I've been an engineer since 1990 or 1991. I can't remember that far back, but it's been a while. And I've written all kinds of crazy things using Python. Pretty much at every single job that I've had the honor and the privilege of being able to work full-time in Python. So that's why I'm generally happier than other people. But I will tell you this, in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was really hard to find a full-time software engineering role where you're only using Python and other stuff like, SQL or whatever. So I consider myself lucky. All right. Sorry I'm late to PyBay. I was doing that yesterday. That actually wasn't, that picture wasn't from yesterday, but I was doing something like that yesterday. So I was very far away and behind lots of bad traffic. No, coming back. There was no traffic on the river. So that's why I wasn't able to make it on Friday and Saturday. Okay, so here's the outline of the talk. I'll give you some historical motivation. Talk about using the with statement. I'm sure most of you guys already know how to do it, so we can skip through that pretty quickly. An introduction to context managers, give you an example that needs one, and then talk about context management overall, and then how you would implement context management, and then if there's a bonus, we have a few minutes afterwards, then we'll go do that. Okay, so opening files 20 years ago looked something like this. You open the file for read, for every line, f.readLine will just read single line in and then you print it, or you print the line.rstrip it. Everybody know why, right? Right? You guys know why you either rstrip it or use the comma? Because otherwise your output would be double-spaced. So because print does its own new line, the file has its own new line, so you either have to rip off the one that's on the line, or you tell print to suppress its new line. Okay? I know I see we need some review here. Okay? And then you close the file. With lines? Oh, that's next. This is the older style. Yeah. Yes. This is not exactly the world's best way of doing it, especially since you're holding on to this resource for longer than you need. So to improve on this, we decided to use something else, like, well, why don't I just suck in all the lines and then close the file right away? So if that file is a very active file, like a log file, then the operating system will allow writes to it. So that's the next step, is reading all the lines in and then printing it out. So your close is called faster, all right? So release your resource quickly. And then in 2001, we realized that, what does this do, read lines? It reads every single line of your file into a list. What if this is a 2 gig Apache log file? Not so good for memory, right? So we need to do something else, because that doesn't work, unless it's a small file, okay? So save memory by using f.x read lines. Anybody remember f.x read lines? So what that does is, it's just like read lines, except it is an iterator instead of Exactly. Instead of reading everything into a list, you have something like it. But guess what? There's a bug now. Because you know what? I closed the file. All right, so if I'm doing my lazy evaluations, this is going to fail. It's going to say file is closed. So you got to fix that. You have to unfortunately, move the close back down to the end. Okay? But X read lines didn't last too long because the next year in Python 2.2, we have more iterators. In fact, files themselves became their own iterators. No more having to do read line or read lines. Right? Everything is always lazy eval. But you use the file object now. There's no f dot anymore because a file object itself is its own iterator. Okay? The other new thing that came around is universal new line. Anybody remember that? No, you don't remember that either. This is a trip down memory lane, isn't it? Okay. So back in the old days, we had PCs, we had POSIX compliant machines, we had Macs, and they all had different line termination characters. New line, carriage return new line, or just carriage return. So when you open a file for universal new lines, it treats all of those files as if they terminated with new line by itself. So you didn't have to write any special if-def code in case that log file was generated on a Windows server or something like that. So very, very useful. Okay, so that's 2002. We are making progress. Okay, in 2006, that's when we saw the with statement. Okay, so this debuted in Python 2.5. So you had to do from under future import with statement. So now we can do with, open your file as usual, and then the close is gone because context managers are awesome. Yay. All right, next step. In 2008, well, that's when 2.6 came out. No need to import from under future anymore. It just comes with Python. So we just remove that one line and we're done almost. Because things changed slightly again in Python 3. All right, so universal new lines became built into open, so you no longer have to use the capital U. In fact, it's a special flag called new line, and if you set it to none or don't pass it in at all, it assumes you want universal new line. You actually can change, so this is more flexible. So if you set new line to a variety of different things, you can actually control how the new line works, okay? The new line processing, that is. So that's the next step. And then, of course, in Python 3, print becomes a function, and no longer do we have to do the trailing comma. We can just say end equals nothing, or you could still do line.rstrip. Okay, and then if we clean everything up to like current modern day standards, then this is what your code would look like or should look like if you're opening and dumping out a text file to the screen. Okay, so of course the with statement does all the magic, but I just kind of wanted to show you sort of like the progression in time as far as what happened. And I think the weirdest thing that took me by surprise when I first learned about the with statement was where's the f dot close? Because I'm so paranoid. I came from like, let's just say I learned computing before some of you guys were born, and we were always told to close our files and we were done with them. So I'm always paranoid about putting f.close. I know some people just skip that, and that's usually fine because modern day operating systems can take care of the cleanup. The OS kernels can do that for you. But some of us who are older are maybe more set in our ways, like myself. All right, I programmed Fortran on punch cards. Who's used punch cards? Oh, right. All right. I flipped light switches on a PDP-8. Only one survivor. Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted to hear. All right, let's move on. This is what your code today in Python should look like, whether you're using Python 2 or Python 3. If you're using Python 2, you should be importing the print function, because what you want to do is you want to future-proof your code. If you're still using 2, you should start coding Python 3 anyway, because at some point, the inevitable will happen, right? You might as well, like I said, future-proof it so you don't have to port it later, okay? So from under future, import print underscore function. That's all you need to do, and then you can use the full print function. Everything is good, and it's ignored in Python 3, so you can just leave that line in there. Okay, so before the with statement, you had a bunch of code to allocate a resource, and maybe you assigned to some object that you want to use it. Then you have your block of code, which is called a suite in Python lore. And then you have some logic to release a resource. That's sort of like the way it goes. But one thing that the PEP authors recognize is that this is infrastructure code that's not directly related to your application. It is related to acquiring a resource that your app needs to use and then releasing one. And why should we burden the application developer to having to deal with this kind of stuff? Okay, so that was the main motivation why context managers were created. So with the with statement, you're pushing most of this logic for both allocation and releasing of the resource to the context manager. You make one call to allocate these, and then the release happens auto-magically, which means that you still make one call. You probably simplified that block of logic to allocate your code into one call. Then you pass that to the with statement, and then you can optionally save a handle in case you want to use it, or that you need to use it because you're calling a method in it, or you don't have to do that at all. Because it could be, I just want to get something, and then when it's done, release that thing. So I'll show you that. And then you have your block of code. Okay, so that's what it looks like with the with statement. So context management follows this idea that when you acquire a resource, that's the same thing as initializing it, which means that if you haven't acquired it yet, you haven't initialized it, so you shouldn't be able to execute in this block of code yet. Okay, so you start when you actually get the thing, you do all the work that you need to do, and then when you're done, you let it go. Okay, so the context manager is the code that handles the logistics that you shouldn't have to worry about as the application developer. And the other thing is that when I first learned the with statement, I started using it with everything, and then I realized I couldn't. It made me sad. It was a sad face. The objects that you use with the with statement must have a context manager, or else you cannot use the with statement. Okay. All right. So files is pretty easy. We kind of looked at that already. You open a file, you have a block of code, and then you close it, and then that gets simplified to the with statement, opening the file, saving it as F, because I can call methods on the file, and then close it. Okay, but you don't have to. If you're not going to call any methods, then I mean, that would be a bizarre thing to do, because typically with files, you have to have the file object to do something, all right? It'd be odd if you didn't, but so that's why you see that as an example. If you look at locks, that's a little bit different, okay? So in the, before context management came to locks, you would basically get a lock, and then you would acquire the lock, and then you would have your critical section of code, and then you would release a lock so that you can synchronize all your threads so they don't all run into the critical section and give you race conditions and bad things like that. So since these are the only two actions that you take with locks, you don't really have to do lock.acquire with the with statement. You just say with the lock, and then your block of code, and then the context manager will handle the release when it's done. Okay, so it simplifies your code so that you can actually see what it is that you're trying to build. All right, so when context management and the with statement was first introduced to Python in 2.5, there was an initial set of objects that came blessed with context managers, and this was the list of the 8. Since then, more and more objects have been, granted context management, so it's harder to keep track of it. I haven't checked online. I'm curious whether or not there's even an overall list of the objects in Python that have it already, but it'd be kind of interesting to see what those are. So. As of 2.5, these were the only things you could use with the with statement. Okay, so let's talk about how to implement a context manager, okay, because that's the real reason why we're here. Like I said, I was kind of surprised when I was looking online and I didn't see a lot of content outside of some Stack Overflow answers and a couple of blog posts, but people really don't talk about it. So I think I wanted to kind of pull the curtains behind the wizard so that you guys could see what the wizards could look like, all right? And there's 3 different ones. So let's look at an example here. So this one is basically using URL open. Most of you guys probably know that if you pass it a URL, what it does is it opens a connection to the web server as if it was a file, like a local file. And it's a file-like object because you can make calls like .readline or .readlines, or you can iterate through it and then do whatever you need to do, and then you close it. So this is an example of an object that does not have a context manager. Okay. Of course, in Python 3, it already has a context manager, so this example is mostly in Python 2 because I want to show a very basic example and build a context manager around it so you know how to do it. Okay. So what we really want is something like this with urllib.url open of the URL as u, print u.readline. So that's all it does is prints the first line of the web page, which is probably going to be some HTML5 tag bracket HTML. Not a big deal. So I'm just, as an example, using the main Python website, but it could be anything you want. All right, so the goal is to do something like this. But if you tried this in Python 2 today, it won't work because it doesn't have a context manager. It'll work in Python 3, but it'll be url lib.url_request.url_open because it got moved into request. All right, so how do we do this? So here's the basic code you need to start with. We have the same URL. We're going to import url lib, but we're also going to import context lib. So remember, this is Python 2 now. Okay. So no context manager looks like the same as the example that we saw earlier with files. Okay, so you call url lib url open of your URL, read the first line, print it, and then close it. Now, there are 3 different ways to add context management to that code. So I'm just going to show you all 3. The first one is the formal way of doing it, which is writing a context manager class. The second way is using a context management decorator that comes in the context lib module. And then the third way is using a context management wrapping class. Okay, so I'll show you all 3 right now. So when you're writing your own context manager, it is a class. In order to allocate the resource, that logic goes into the underscore enter special method, and then to release the resource, that goes into underscore exit. So if we were to create one for my URL open, you would have an initializer to assign that URL, and then when you acquire the a resource that is calling URL open, assigning that to a handle, and then returning the handle so that you can use it as if it had context management. And then when the with statement is done, it will call under exit, pass in any kind of exception information that comes with it. You have to have that because it automatically passes those 3 things, and if you don't, you'll get expected 1 parameter got 4 or something like that, right? So you have to have that, which calls the close method of that object. So this is it. This is the whole thing. You just need to have an under enter and an under exit. The under enter is also optional. You don't have to initialize it, but you do need to return something. Okay? All right, so with that, I can have this. So my URL open is that class name. You pass in the URL. It calls under init. It assigns that to self.url, and then it calls under enter of that object, which returns the u that's saved here. And then you call u.readline, and then when this block of code is done, then it calls close. Okay? That's as easy as it is. But if your logic is a little bit more complicated or you're uncomfortable with writing classes, there's 2 helpers so that you can avoid that. So you can make it easier. So the 2 other ways of doing it, use these context management tools that come in the context lib module. So the first one is the context lib.contextManager decorator, and then the second one is context lib.closing. So let us look at those 2. All right, so what is this decorator? Well, what it is it's a Python wrapping generator. Okay, Python is wrapping this generator. So if it's a generator, it has to have a yield statement. Okay, so the code before the yield is considered what you would put in your double underscore enter if you were to do the class version. And the code after the yield is equivalent to what you would put in underscore exit. Okay, so if we were to look at that, it would look something like this. My URL open, URL, here's my under enter, then I yield it, and then my under exit. Oh shoot, I was gonna quiz you guys. I was gonna say, this is your under exit, where's your under enter? But I already spilled the beans, darn it. Yeah, I know. I can't do this talk, it's crazy. Anyway, this is a really simple example. You guys totally grok this, right? Okay, that's awesome. Much easier than writing a class, right? I mean, I'm not against writing classes, but if I can avoid it, to make my code easier to read, this decorator looks pretty easy, okay, in my opinion. I could be totally wrong, and we can argue about this. But then I would probably think something weird of you, okay? So don't argue with me. All right. If we were to use that decorated generator, it would look very similar to using the class, except it's lowercase m instead of uppercase because it's not a class anymore. All right, so with my URL open URL as u, print u.readline. All right, the third way of doing it is a closing wrapper class. So like I mentioned earlier, your underscore enter can be empty. It doesn't have to have anything in it, or it doesn't have to be implemented. And your under exit will add this call to, it will add this, and then it will call the close method. So this thing is really, really basic. This thing is only used in a situation where, God, if I only had .close, that's all I want, right? If I could only put in a .close as an under exit, I would be done. My object would be complete, okay? Just like my URL open object, okay? That's all it's missing. And what happens is when you try to use the with statement with URL open and not use any of this stuff, it'll say something like under exit is not implemented. And you're like, no, I just want to call closing. How hard can it be, right? So that's where this thing comes in. So this is equivalent to the following, where you have a class. I had to put it in lowercase because it's actually, the spelling uses lowercase c. So I have an object, and I'm going to create an initializer that assigns that to self.object. And then my under enter doesn't do anything at all. It just returns that object. And then at the very end is what I want, which is an under exit that calls close. That's all I want. Okay. In the docs, they show you an even simpler equivalent to this. Okay. So everybody understands this because we already covered this about 10 minutes ago. Right. If you look at the docs for context lib and look at the closing wrapper class, it'll show you something even easier, which is, well, just pretend it's this generator wrapper that I talked about, or this decorator. So closing of a thing, try yielding the thing, and then when it's done, call close a thing. Okay, so the docs have this, a 4-line version of it, right? But now you know what this looks like using the decorator and also with the class, which I did on the previous slide. All right, so what does that mean? So what that means is I don't have to write any class. I don't have to write any function. I just add this extra call here. So you'll have to mind unwrap this because it's wrapping. Don't ask me why it's wrapping, because that's related to why my. Thank you, Anna. She says it's a wrapper. So okay. I just want to cry. All right. What this does is it just takes whatever's in the parentheses and it adds an under exit so you can call so it calls .close on it. That's it. If you have a thing that all you want is .close, this is what you do. You don't have to write a class. You don't have to write a generator and put a decorator on it. You just have context_lib.closing, and you just have the rest of the line as if that wasn't there. You just take whatever you had, you just do that, then you print udo.readline, and then it calls close, and then you're done. So those are the 3 ways of implementing context management. All right? You guys should have all known this already, but like I said, nobody talks about it, and it's pretty basic. Okay? So where do you go to read more? There's a lot of pages in the docs. There's more pages than you would think. Okay, so obviously, context lib is a good place to look at. The documentation for that module, obviously, very good. Keep in mind that the 2.x version doesn't have much because all the fixes and all the new features are going into Python 3. So if you're still in Python 2, this is another hint. You should be using Python 3. All right? There is a page in the reference docs on the data model and basically how the with statement works with context managers. And then there's another page on context managers because it's a standard type, so you have to look in that page. These 3 pages are not connected to each other very well. Look at the URLs, they're very different. You can also look at PEP 343, which tells you more about it. And then if you want to learn more about resource acquisition is initialization, there's also a Wikipedia page. So those are some resources that you guys need to look at. I'll also make the slides available for you guys afterwards. So I'll probably just send a tweet out. So you might have to just follow me until I send it out. Then you can unfollow me, okay? Because I could be annoying. I make political rants now because I'm completely enraged at the current government that we have. So. So I'm sure most of you guys are with me on it, but it's just that if I don't look at Twitter, my blood pressure goes up, and I'm always like sweating, like when's the nuclear bomb going to fall or whatever. And I kind of like grew up in the 80s. You know, some of you guys are way too young to remember, you know, the Bay of Pigs and all this kind of stuff, right? So some of you are probably wondering, Bay of Pigs? What the hell is that? Yeah, exactly. Oh, okay. Anyway, I grew up under threat of nuclear war, but some kids are exposed to this for the first time. It's a very unnerving thing. So I swear I only do political rants on the weekends and after hours. I don't do it during business hours. Okay, I'm trying to stay professional, but anyway. Context management simplifies the plumbing stuff. The main reason why they added it to the language is because it lets developers focus on the application and not about the infrastructure stuff that you shouldn't have to worry about. There are a variety of options for adding context management. The first one is writing a full-blown class. It's probably not the easiest thing to do because you have, you know, I mean, if your code is complicated and it, you know, you have lots of lines of code in your under enter and your under exit, that's perfectly fine to do. But if you can avoid those by using some of the you know, the convenience tools that are in the context lib. So one is the generator decorator context manager, and then the other one is the closing wrapper. And then you're done, all right? Context managers will let you celebrate, okay? Because now you can use the with statement everywhere, all right? All right, thank you guys. So I'm going to post the slides to my social channels. So if you want to get those, just hop on board. You can take a picture of that if you want. Oh, yeah, sure. Perfectly fine. Okay, that sounds good. And we have time for a lot of questions, but because I said there was going to be a bonus if we had time, and we have time, all right? Because you guys are smarter than any other audience that I've ever had. Because like nobody like stopped to ask questions. You absorbed everything, or you were just like lying and just nodding your head. Okay, like an automaton. All right. Oh, okay. I do tell bedtime stories to children. Yes. I may not look like I was born in the 60s, but my wife always says, you're looking at his maturity age, not his calendar age. I'm like, fine, honey. Be that way. The bonus. I got aggravated when I had to do something like this. I had to write something like this to copy a file. I had to do with open the source file. Then I had to do with open the right file, the copy of the file. And then I could do my f.read and pass that to g.write. What I didn't realize was that in Python 2.7 and 3.1, they added a cool new feature, which is you can actually use comma. So you can do with open something comma as f, comma, on the same line, unwrap this, open that as g. So you have one with statement. You only have to indent one time. Okay? Yeah. Who knew about this one? Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay? Double the pleasure. All right. So 2.7 and 3.1. All right. And if we were to apply that to our current example, like I want to save my current web page, let's say python.org goes into index.html because that's a generic name, with URL open as f, open my file for read, then same thing, and then I'm done. Yeah, isn't it? Isn't it? But the funny thing is Python will never claim it's a functional programming language. It just steals all the cool stuff from existing functional programming languages, which is really awesome because I know a bunch of functional programmer friends are like, Python is like a false idol. Okay, it does not, it's not a functional programming language. I go, yes, that's right. It is not a functional programming language. Never said it was. But that doesn't mean we can't grab some cool ideas from other programming languages, right? I mean, to me, Python is the greatest hits of lots of programming languages. So, because we all know that Guido studied a lot of programming languages when he was at CNRI, as well as CWI. So, all right, that's all I had. Anybody have questions? Yes. Which one? Oh. Can you do a lock on the file?
No, is the with statement locking the file during the read, or?
No, there's no implementation of locking the file. I mean, only when you're opening the file for write. Reading is never locked.
So the
But it's sorry, but I was going to finish that off with saying that's sort of like an operating system dependent thing. It's not a Python level thing.
So the advantage of using with is that you don't have to do the closing and of file, or?
Yeah, for if you get down to the very basics, yes, it's a way for you to avoid f.close and get away from the crazy teacher like me who yells at students for not putting f.close. But your situation may be more complicated, especially when you're building your own objects, and you need to have, the code that's required to allocate the resource and to free the resource is a little bit more complicated. So we did files as one example. We showed locks as another example. But a third example would be like, what does it take for you to get a database connection, right? You have to pre-allocate sort of maybe multiple connections from a database pool. Then you have to slowly hand them off to individual threads that ask for them. And then at the very end, you have to release that resource back into the pool so other threads or other applications can get access to it. So your situation may be more complicated, but I just picked very easy examples so that you can totally grok the concept and adapt it to whatever objects you have. But the main idea behind context management is just kind of like, so you don't have to clutter up your code with something that is not directly related to your application that needs to use this resource. Okay? Anybody else? Sure.
Okay, this is about like if you're running a Flask app, for example, and you want to wrap the whole app in a with statement, or like, I mean, is there some way to have some sort of implicit context management, or is it even necessary? Like, for example, if I have a device that that would normally be opened, and I want to keep that device open for the whole app, for every route in it to use that same device. You understand?
Yeah. Okay. I can kind of get what you're talking about. So you're really asking, if I have a server-side application, can I use the with statement to basically manage a single resource that my app is going to have be using throughout the time that your server is up, basically. The answer is yes, of course, you can. It depends on what that resource does and how, whether or not it allows other objects to, access it or not. So certainly nothing wrong with doing that, because at least then in the actual web application part of the code, then you don't have to see much of that code. You can actually keep your resource allocation code sort of in a separate module, kind of like away from the web part of your app. And then the other good thing is that you can reuse that in some other app, another web app, or another non-web app.
Is there some way to do it without indenting the whole app?
Oh, you're talking about the indentation with the with statement. That's harder to do. I mean, you basically would have to have your main function. Something has to be indented if you're going to use a with statement, right? Something has to be. So if you were to simplify your startup code to one line, then you can just have that code that uses the with statement be very simple. It just makes a single call. Because otherwise, I think you're afraid that if you have a lot of code here, you're going to have to shove all that over just because of the with statement, right? So I would just simplify that to making that your startup, your bootstrap code be sort of a single call, and then you can have a clean-looking with statement. Okay, good question. Anybody else? Let you guys go downstairs and steal more snacks. Okay, a question over there? Yeah. No? Anybody? I saw a hand. I'm mistaken. All right. Thanks, you guys.